What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. I've been gone for 2 weeks now, but I am back. I realized that I had a baseball game on the night that I was supposed to record last week's podcast, so that did not happen. But now we are back. We have a ton of stuff to talk about over these last 2 weeks for the Washington Commanders. We'll start, of course, with the 2023 NFL Draft. I have not had a chance to talk about my thoughts on all 7 picks, I believe. Yeah, all 7 picks that Washington made over the course of the draft, plus some interesting undrafted free agents that Washington did pick up. I'm going to go over 3 of those guys. After that, Washington did release Chase Roulier. I'm going to go over that. Chase Young's 50-year option got declined during this time as well. So that is also going to be a talking point. Another guy joined the Josh Harris group in terms of possibly buying the Washington Commanders, or I guess at this point for buying the Washington Commanders. We're going to go ahead and talk about that and capping things off, something that just happened over this last weekend. Reports saying that the Commanders have talked with Andrew Luck over last offseason, and Jim Irsay, the Colts owner, is now calling out Washington for tampering, which could potentially get rid of the 2024 first-round pick for the Washington Commanders and their shot at possibly, or Patrick Mahomes 2.0, as people call him, Caleb Williams. So that is going to be later on in this week's episode. But first, we're going to have to go over this 2023 NFL draft class because this was a very interesting draft class. We'll start things off at number 16 when Washington was on the clock at number 16 and Christian Gonzalez was on the board. The entire Washington fan base, or at least every Washington fan that I know, because I haven't heard of a fan that, or I don't know a fan that would do otherwise, would have selected Christian Gonzalez in this case. He's one of the best players in the class. In my opinion, he's a top 5 player in this class. I've talked about it before, talked about it many times on this podcast. I did not think that he would fall to 16, but he did end up falling. Washington, of course, goes ahead and passes up on him, just like they passed up on Jamison Williams last year before they traded back in the draft to select Jahan Dotson. Washington passes up on Christian Gonzalez to select the guy that they want, Emmanuel Forbes, the cornerback out of Mississippi State. Again, Emmanuel Forbes, he's a good player, great prospect. There's not many weaknesses in his game besides his physical state, where he's currently listed at 160 pounds. Supposedly, there's been some reports, don't know if the reports are true, that he's bulked up to now 180 pounds, which has been great. Which would be great to hear if he did or not. But he was listed at 166, I believe, at the scouting combine, which is not good. He's 6 feet tall, so a very small guy, but for a cornerback, I guess slightly below average for a cornerback, as Christian Gonzalez 6'1", I believe, or 6'2". But he's a lot heavier and a lot bulkier too. So Emmanuel Forbes, in his game himself, a complete ball hawk. He's some people give him comps to Trevon Diggs in terms of he has that he's a complete ball hawk factor, but also can give up some big plays as well. Great in coverage, and cover zone coverage and pretty much all that stuff. So that's great because he's going to fit perfectly in Washington, where we love to run zone coverage. So you wouldn't want him lining up one-on-one against DK Metcalf or DeAndre Hopkins or a bigger guy like CeeDee Lamb or something like that. You don't want that to happen, lining him up in press man, and Washington will not let him do that in that Jack Del Rio defense. So that is at least one good thing, is that he is in a good scheme for himself, a zone scheme with Jack Del Rio, as we like to run a lot of zone. So that was a pick at 16. Ron Rivera did say in his press conference after that there was no talks about possibly trading down like Washington did last year when they moved from 11 to 16, traded back with the New Orleans Saints. And there's a lot of talk about Washington possibly trading down this year. I think more this year than last year, because this year Washington really could go best player available. There weren't really any standout offensive tackles in this draft class, which was a big thing that Washington needs. There was 2 really standout corners in this class to me, and that was Christian Gonzalez and Devin Witherspoon. That would, of course, arguably maybe want to trade up for. But, of course, Christian Gonzalez, he falls to 16, and Washington then selects a guy that I would probably take in the late first round, early second round, because I do have some pretty big questions about his size. So again, it's only 160, 170 pounds. So that is not going to be great in the NFL, because when you have Derrick Henry running down your throat, and not only that, but just quick tossing to the left or to the right, you quick toss right to the side of Emmanuel Forbes, and you have Henry running downfield. It's not going to end well for Emmanuel Forbes. One good thing, I did look at some of his film, he's not afraid to tackle guys, but it could definitely be a little bit dangerous if you have a bigger running back running straight at him, because the guy could get absolute trucked. So that's the pick at number 16 for Washington. In round two, Washington selected Jartavius Martin, or Quan Martin, as what he wants to go by. So the safety, or the nickel, out of Illinois is a very interesting selection. There was guys on the board like Osiris Torrance that Washington could have gotten. Some other offensive linemen like what's his name? I'm blanking. The guy from DeJuan Jones, the guy from Ohio State. So he was also on the board when Washington picked, but instead they went safety and nickel, boosting the secondary in both of their first selections. So I guess if you use a first round pick and a second round pick on two guys, at this point, if you're Jack Del Rio in that secondary, who lost Chris Harris again, Chris Harris Sr. to Chris Harris Sr. to Tennessee in the offseason for a higher position, or almost for like a Eric Bieniemy type lateral move, where he got an upgraded title, but pretty much is going to be doing the same thing over in Tennessee. So you're losing your defensive backs coach. You're bringing a new defensive backs coach, and now you select Emmanuel Forbes and Jartavius Martin, two defensive backs, with your first two picks in the draft. There's no reason why this secondary should be letting us down again like it was last year. Now, I will give him props for this. I've said multiple times this offseason that I don't want Ratchet Wild Goose being on the field next year, because that guy was not good. But I mean, I guess my wish came true, because Emmanuel Forbes is now going to be there. I think Kendall Fuller will be kicked to the inside to play nickel, and Jartavius Martin, a second round pick, will be backing him up to play that nickel spot. I think this is going to be Kendall Fuller's last year with the Washington Commanders, because I believe he's a free agent next offseason. But a guy like Jartavius Martin, if Kendall Fuller does get kicked inside, Jartavius Martin is right there as a younger guy. Again, he's 23 years old, though. Three of the guys on this list, I'm going to get to them when I get to them, but 3 draft picks for Washington were 23 years old or older. So that is definitely something interesting. Washington has drafted older guys in the past. Terry McLaurin was, I believe, 23 or 24 when he was drafted as well. So, yeah, they love to draft older guys, older dudes, seniors and stuff, 4-year starters. Speaking of 4-year starters, the guy that they drafted in the 3rd round, Ricky Stromberg, the center out of Arkansas, was a 4-year starter at Arkansas. So so basically, hold on, we'll go back for a second to round 2. Jartavius Martin, the pick in the 2nd round, I'm probably have to give it like a C+, B-, because I think there's bigger needs on the roster than a safety or a nickel, and we could have used that pick on a different guy, or we could have drafted a safety or a nickel later on in the draft. So that was the pick in round 2. In round 3, I just mentioned it, Ricky Stromberg, the center out of Arkansas. And I think I love this pick. I actually like this pick a lot, because Stromberg was a potential 6th or 5th round pick going into the draft process, and then great combine, great Senior Bowl, and now he's here getting drafted in round 30 by the Washington Commanders, and he'd probably go in round 3 to a different team as well. So Ricky Stromberg, the pick for Washington, a 4-year starter, boosting that inside offensive line. Again, we drafted positions of needs this draft, and I really respect them for that. Besides possibly the Jartavius Martin or the Quan Martin pick, every single pick was for a position of need. So, or a high position of need, because safety nickel, we do need it, but it wasn't like top 3 or top 4. So we could have definitely gotten something else over there. But Ricky Stromberg, out of Arkansas in the 3rd round. In the 4th round, we continue building the offensive line, getting Braden Daniels, the guard or the tackle out of Utah, a 4-year starter. I do want to say Stromberg and Daniels, both of them can play multiple positions. And this was something that Washington really likes in their offensive linemen. Braden Daniels, he started at guard, he started at left guard, right guard, and left tackle for Utah over the last 2 seasons. So that is something to keep an eye on. He can play multiple positions. Washington in the past, throughout the season, has gotten pretty thin on that offensive line. We've always had to add guys at some point in the season to boost that offensive line depth. So getting Braden Daniels, we still have Chris Paul from last year that can play guard as well. So I'm really liking what Washington is building on this offensive line. Ricky Stromberg, I believe he's also played guard as well in his career. So he also has that mobility or that versatility across the offensive line that we'd like this, that Ron Rivera and that offensive line coach likes to see. So that's the pick in round 4. In round 5, Washington traded up. They used their subtle compensatory pick at 215th, the 6th round pick that we got for Tim Settle, and pick 150 to move up 13 spots to 137, which I believe was the second pick. I believe it was the second pick in the 5th round. And with that pick, Washington goes ahead and selects one of my favorite prospects in this draft, KJ Henry, the edge out of Clemson. Now, Henry, I talked about Washington loving the draft older guys. KJ Henry is 24 years old. He's 5 years in college. So KJ Henry, I like him a lot. I think he's really going to be an impact edge. I think he's going to make a big impact. He's going to be wearing number 55. I believe number 55. I could be wrong, but I think it's number 55, rushing off the edge. I really like KJ Henry. I can't wait to meet him at training camp. Seems like a great guy. And he's really going to make it. I think he's really going to make an impact in year 1 for Washington. So especially if Chase Young or Montez Sweat goes down at some point this season, KJ Henry is going to be there. And KJ Henry, in my opinion, will be a starter at some point, like to start a season for Washington. So I like this pick a lot. Not really much else to say about it. I think the trade up was good with the Bills. We got our guy KJ Henry. We didn't really need that slow compensatory pick. I'm fine with it. In round 6, Washington drafted Chris Rodriguez Jr., the running back out of Kentucky. Now, I feel like this is a very Washington pick. A running back who is going to try and replace J.D. McKissick or be that third running back in the 6th round. Not bad value. Again, there were some guys on the board that I was really interested in. I can't remember who, but there were some guys that were falling a lot in the draft, and drafting running back here wasn't one of my favorite picks. But again, we need a third running back on this roster, and it pretty much cancels out the opportunity for Jarrett Patterson or Jonathan Williams to make the 53-man roster if Chris Rodriguez does turn out to be worth a draft pick or worth a 6th round pick. So that pretty much cancels out the spot for Patterson and Williams. In round 7, Washington capped their draft off, drafting Andre Jones Jr., the edge rusher out of Louisiana. So why is Washington drafting 2 edge rushers on day 3? I'll get to that in a second. But the 24, another 24-year-old rookie, Andre Jones. So KJ Henry, Andre Jones, both edge rushers, 24 years old. And then Quan Martin is 23 years old. So I don't really know much about Andre Jones, but hopefully he's all right. I've never really heard of him before this draft or before we drafted him. So, I mean, he's all right, but I think he's really going to be depth piece for us. So at the edge spot, especially, I don't think he's going to play that much this season, probably in the preseason, but we still have guys like F.A. Obata who really made a big impact last season. So, yeah. Oh, wait. No. Okay, sorry. For a second I thought that F.A. Obata got suspended, but I do want to talk about that really quickly. Shaka Toney did get suspended from the for all of next season indefinitely for betting on NFL games. So that is something to keep an eye on. Another edge rusher or defensive lineman that we won't be able to play for next season. So Shaka Toney did get suspended. I won't really put it as a headline here, but just a depth piece for Washington. Not that great. So that is the draft class for the Washington Commanders. Emmanuel Forbes in the 1st round, Quan Martin in the 2nd, Ricky Stromberg, Braden Daniels in rounds 3 and 4. And then round 5, Washington trade up to get KJ Henry. Round 6 was Chris Rodriguez, and round 7 was Andre Jones Jr. So that's the 7 picks that Washington made. Again, they traded their later 6th round pick to move up in the 5th to draft KJ Henry. In terms of undrafted free agents, Washington, I believe, signed 11 or 12. We signed a good amount. Some of the ones that stood out to me the most was Penn State wide receiver Mitchell Tinsley, which Jahan Dotson had a say in Mitchell Tinsley coming to Washington. So I'm excited. I think Mitchell Tinsley can make this 53-man roster. I think that he's really going to give guys like I'm forgetting his name, but Marcus Kemp and uh, guys like Dax Milne some pressure to make this roster, because if you look at it now, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel is 3, De'Ami Brown 4, and then Mitchell Tinsley 5, and then I think I'm forgetting someone, but I mean, this wide receiver room is pretty stacked right now in terms of there's not a lot of, here we go, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel. Yeah, De'Ami Brown is 4. And then it's going to give guys like Dax Milne, Marcus Kemp, Alex Erickson, Kyrick McGowan pressure, because Mitchell Tinsley is going to be a wide receiver that I would, if I had to say right now, 80% chance that he makes the 53-man roster. Another wide receiver that could possibly make the roster because of his punt return and kick return ability, Kazmir Allen, the wide receiver or the receiver returner out of UCLA. He has explosive speed, and I can't wait to watch him in camp, because he seems like he's going to be the main guy to return kicks and punts, which was an issue last year. We had a rotation of a bunch of guys. Dax Milne, I felt like never really, he always called fair catch. Never really, his longest return, I think, last year was like 10 yards or 9 yards, which is pretty disappointing. Antonio Gibson didn't really have that spark that Ron Rivera thought he would have after Brian Robinson took over that backfield. Gibson moved, again, a former wide receiver, Antonio Gibson. So, again, he moved to returner, and he didn't really give the spark that Washington wanted. So Kazmir Allen could also make the 53-man roster if Washington does go with 6 wide receivers, which they have for the past few seasons. You got Terry, Jahan, Curtis, De'Ami Brown, Mitchell Tinsley. Kazmir Allen leaves out Marcus Kemp, who a guy that Eric Bieniemy likes, coming over from Kansas City, and also Dax Milne, who, if I had to make a prediction right now, I don't think he's going to make the 53-man roster, especially if Kazmir Allen is who a lot of fans think he's going to be. So those are 2 undrafted free agents. A third one is Fordham quarterback Tim DeMorat. He's possibly going to be the QB3 for Washington, which have to wait and see. But that was the only quarterback that Washington brought in throughout all the rookies so far. So it's going to be Sam Howell, Jacoby Brissett, and Tim DeMorat. I guess that's going to be the 3 unless something else changes. So we'll have to wait and see for that one. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the 2023 draft class for the Washington Commanders. Now, I do want to skip ahead of the Chase Roulier thing. I want to first actually go to Chase Young and his 5th-year option being declined, because this is why Washington drafted KJ Henry in the 5th round, or trade up for KJ Henry. This is why Washington drafted Andre Jones in the 7th round, is because all right, well, I just kicked my M&M dispenser that was on the ground. But okay, where was I? So KJ Henry and Andre Jones are, again, the 2 draft picks that Washington made for edge rusher, and that's because Chase Young's 5th-year option got declined, which was pretty expected. It was $17.4 million fully guaranteed for the 2024 NFL season, and now we can pretty much say for this upcoming season, it's going to be Montez Sweat against Chase Young. One of them will be getting an extension. One of them will be testing free agency, because unless we get a deal done with Montez Sweat now, which, again, Montez Sweat this year is playing on his 5th-year option, because we did pick that up. So Chase Young is now, again, it's been so weird for Chase Young. Defensive Player of the Year, it wasn't the best Defensive Player of the Year season by any means. It was kind of underwhelming, but for a guy that was named Defensive Rookie of the Year, for a guy named Defensive Rookie of the Year, it wasn't that great, which I think got hyped up a lot because of his forced fumbles and everything like that. So then the year after that, he tears his ACL after doing nothing for the first half of the season, and he's out for a good portion of the last season as well, before coming back and only picking up 1 sack. So he hasn't had the greatest career to start off his NFL journey, but hopefully he can break out in year 4 and have another season just like the one in his rookie year back in 2020 for Washington, because, again, he was a former number 2 overall pick. So Washington needs to they need to know what they're doing with him and what they're doing with Montez Sweat, because as of right now, no edge rushers are under contract besides the two rookies, KJ Henry and Andre Jones, for the 2024 NFL season. So bringing back Sweat or Young is very important. Which one will it be? We will have to wait and see for after the season. That's my guess. So that's it for the Chase Young fifth year option being declined. Moving on to the reason why Washington drafted Ricky Stromberg with their third round pick is because they are releasing Chase Roulier, which is going to save $4 million in cap space. It's going to save $8 million, but then it'll be $4 million in dead cap. So overall, it's going to be saving $4 million as well. It was kind of obvious after the Ricky Stromberg pick. You brought in Nick Gates, Chase Roulier. He was one of the best centers in the NFL back in 2020. And now in 2021, season-ending leg injury, 2022, season-ending leg injury, and now he's getting released. Not that surprising, in my opinion. But again, he was such a good player in 2020, one of the best players pretty much our best player on our offensive line in 2020. So it is going to be a little bit hard getting rid of him, but hopefully Nick Gates can step up and Ricky Stromberg eventually take over for that starting center spot for Washington. So, yep, the Commanders are releasing Chase Roulier. Moving on, Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO, is joining the Josh Harris group and potentially, okay, I'm just going to get rid of the word potentially at this point because they're joining the Josh Harris group to buy the Washington Commanders. Again, Eric Schmidt, a former Google CEO, he's going to join Josh Harris, the Philadelphia 76ers owner, among a bunch of other guys in that group as well, Magic Johnson being one of them. Schmidt is worth $21.7 billion. So this is a lot of money. We have a bunch of different, I think there was a report saying that Josh Harris has 25% of the stake, which is the most, or 30% of the stake, which is like the most. So there's a bunch of people in this group, which is going to be great because a lot of different opinions can definitely help out a team that has really been under one guy's opinion for the last 30 years. So I'm fine with it. It's a lot more money to put into the team, a lot more money that people can put into the team, which is great. And it means we can possibly get like big free agents and potentially a new stadium eventually, because the FedEx Field thing expires in 2028. So hopefully Washington can get a new field out of this somehow, or a new stadium out of this somehow. So that is the stuff on Eric Schmidt, not that really important. Moving on to Andrew Luck now, and this is the final thing we're going to be talking about today because this is definitely a pretty big bombshell if it does turn out to be true. There were reports that the Commanders asked about Andrew Luck last offseason before trading for Carson Wentz. Now, this is something that many NFL teams have actually done over the course of the last few seasons, but there's something interesting about this one. Jim Irsay has come out and publicly tweeted that Washington should be penalized for tampering if they did talk with Andrew Luck or about Andrew Luck. So I'm not really sure how that works because Andrew Luck, again, he retired back in 2018, 2017, I want to say, with injuries. He retired pretty early. One of former number one overall pick was pretty good. Drafted one pick before Robert Griffin III. So he was pretty good for the Colts, took him to the deep runs in the playoffs, but his contract with the Colts ended after the 2021 season, so it ended in the 2022 offseason. So depending on what time Washington did talk with Andrew Luck, it could or could not be tampering based on what month and stuff they did, if they did before or after the start of the new league year back in 2022. If I give my opinion here, I don't think Jim Irsay is 100% accurate with his statements. I don't think Washington can be penalized for this because I think they messaged him after, or they talked about him after his contract or whatever expired with the Indianapolis Colts. So it's not really tampering, but if it does come out to be tampering, Jim Irsay, who we know is very anti-Dan Snyder, this could be one last laugh for Jim Irsay in terms of getting back at Dan Snyder before the team is sold, because we've seen a lot of teams like the Dolphins, for example, because of tampering, get rid of their first round pick got forfeited this year because of tampering for Tom Brady. So Washington, if you tampered for Andrew Luck, could also lose a first round pick. And when you're in a crucial year where you could possibly be going into next year's draft with a brand new head coach, brand new coaching staff, needing a franchise quarterback, and with a high draft pick, getting a franchise quarterback with your first round pick is very important. Getting a guy like Caleb Williams if you have the number 1 overall pick, or Drake May if you have a top 5 pick, or maybe even a guy like what's his name, JJ McCarthy later on, or Quinn Ewers later on in the first round. So again, a first round pick is super important, especially where Washington is right now. And if Jim Irsay and his statements do end up being true and Washington does lose this first round pick, I think Ron Rivera and this coaching staff needs to be fired immediately. Same with the front office, because if it is true, there's really no point in it. I'd be really disappointed in them, and I feel like that entire coaching staff would really need to go in the front office as well. So, if Washington loses really any draft picks out of this entire situation with Jim Irsay and Andrew Luck, I think this coaching staff needs to go. They're really on thin ice right now, and this would probably be putting it over the edge. So that is it for this week's episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. Next week's episode will be looking over the 2023 Commanders schedule, giving my early preseason predictions about the record and looking over the entire schedule itself. Next week's episode will also be the final episode of season 2 of Keeping Up with the Commanders. It'll be a 36 episode season. So, or 35 episode season. No, it'll be like 37 episode season. Okay. Whatever it is, 35, 36, 37. I'm not exactly sure the exact amount, but that will be that'll be it for season 2, and then we'll come back, of course, in August, right before training camp, and get things rolling again for season 3 of Keeping Up with the Commanders. So, yep, for the second to last time in season 2. See you guys next week. Peace.